Hi, this is Matt at LSAT Lab, and today's lesson is the second in an 8-part series on conditional logic in the logical reasoning section. And today's topic is sufficient conditions. Now, the sufficient condition is the left side of the arrow in an if-then relationship. We're going to save a discussion for necessary conditions for next time. So, in this statement, if one deserves praise for an action, then one must have performed that action deliberately. Right? There are terms in here that we need to be able to recognize as either being sufficient conditions or necessary conditions. And the way you do that is within the sentence, you're looking for a language cue, an indicator word, that tells you either sufficiency or necessity. Some words imply sufficient conditions, some words imply necessary conditions. In this case, we have this if-then relationship, right? So if is one of those words that introduces a sufficient condition. If one deserves praise for an action, if that happens, then one must have performed that action deliberately. So the terms that are going to be connected are deserving praise and being performed deliberately. And the way in which we know how those two terms are organized is with the word if. If introduces a sufficient condition and tells us to put praise on the left side and deliberately on the right side. Now, if we know this relationship is true, what if Jane's hard work deserves praise? What does that tell us? Well, because we're meeting the sufficient condition in the conditional relationship, it's going to tell us that Jane's hard work was deliberate, right? If we know that the sufficient condition is true, it will imply the necessary condition. The reverse is not the case, though. So some words that you can use to help you spot sufficient conditions when you're working through logical reasoning questions are listed here on the left side of the page. And let's just hold on to these words as we work on a few examples today so that we can see how this plays out. So here's the first example. The dog barks every time someone knocks on the door. Inside of this statement, there's a word from the list that helps us organize the relationship. And that word is the word every. Every introduces a sufficient condition. So you could think of the word every as like if. If someone knocks on the door, then the dog barks. Right? So every time someone knocks on the door, that tells us that knocking on the door should be on the left side of the relationship and barking should be on the right side of the relationship. What about this statement? Whoever is kind is loved. In this case, the word whoever introduces a sufficient condition. So the terms that we have to deal with are being kind and being loved. But the word whoever tells us that being kind is the sufficient condition and being loved is the necessary. So these words, these language indicators, they introduce their respective term, but you're not going to get one word introducing a sufficient condition and another word introducing a necessary condition. You're going to get a word that introduces sufficiency or a word that introduces necessity. The other term in the statement is just automatically implied to be the other. So because we know that kind is the sufficient condition, we also know that loved is the necessary condition, but there's no word telling us that. It's a default. So we're just looking for those words to help us figure out where one term goes in the relationship. The other one will just automatically fall to the other side. So here's another example. Flowers were the only decorations. Well, the only gives us a sufficient condition. And so the terms that we're going to be connecting here are decorations and flowers. And the words the only tell us that decorations is the trigger or the sufficient condition and that flowers is the necessary condition. So we can express this as if there are decorations, then they've got to be flowers. Now, you got to watch out for that word only. If you put the word if in front of it, it's a sufficient condition. If you put the word the in front of it, it's a sufficient condition. You put the word if after it, it's a necessary condition. We'll be dealing with those next time. So that's it for today's lesson. We just looked at how to identify sufficient conditions in conditional relationships. Next time, we're going to be looking at necessary conditions. I invite you to check out that lesson here or visit us today at lsatlab.com.